Welcome to episode 24 of Radio Omnicore. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and thank you for listening to our podcast. Our best hopes for the content is that you will gain novel and valuable insights and meet fascinating guests, covering a variety of topics that relate to business and personal development. And in studio today, we welcome Hilton Rudnick, Omnicore's MD, and our special guest, Mark Turpin. Mark is an Organisational Development Consultant, coach, and lecturer with over 30 years of management experience across a wide range of industries. He has an MBA and a master's degree in public policy and management and is a certified leadership coach. He's kept busy working as an associate with Kessels and Smit, the learning company, lecturing at WITS Business School on programs which focus on learning, leadership, knowledge management, and organizational dynamics. And in addition to this, he facilitates communities of practice in different fields. And this is the topic we're going to be exploring today in this episode. So welcome, Mark. It's wonderful to have you in the studio to be able to chat to you a little more around the community of practice.
Thank you.
And welcome, Hilton, back into the podcast. Mark, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came into this very interesting format of learning?
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me onto the podcast. And my background is, it goes back quite a way because I'm of a certain age. I was born in Durban, although I have this funny English accent.
Wow.
Because at a young age we were taken to the UK and I was brought up and schooled in the UK and then studied in Dublin. At Dublin University with very interesting faculty led by Kada Asmal. At that point at Dublin University. And also in the faculty was Mary Robinson, who subsequently became President of Ireland and headed the UN Human Rights Commission. So I had a very interesting learning experience when I first went off to uni. And then by a circuitous route eventually came back to South Africa in the early 90s. And I think increasingly became interested in leadership and learning and how important it is for us as a country to learn quickly and leapfrog, in a sense, into the 21st century from where we were in a very difficult past. The idea of a community of practice builds on, I guess, the coaching idea, the importance of coaching in business today. And a community of practice essentially brings a group of people together. And in that sense, it's very cost effective because we work with a group of people instead of just a single person and creates a learning community for that group of people who have some kind of shared interest or professional identity or workplace, which forms the basis of the community, essentially. And so I facilitate quite a number and really enjoy that work now.
Great. And what exciting projects are you busy working on in that area?
Oh, well, if I think of some of the communities of practice that I've facilitated in the last few years, one of the interesting ones in a large telecommunications company was working with a group of senior women who were seeking really to break through those glass ceilings and deal with the gender issues in the workplace, which was a real privilege for me as a man to work with 15 to 20 senior women and to kind of hear the issues they were dealing with and grappling with in quite a competitive corporate environment. So that was very interesting. And then I worked for a number of years with a group of young professionals, young people in their 20s and very early 30s who were in management positions and trying to find their way in a world that in some ways was rather alien to them as young mostly born-free professional type characters, and helping to facilitate their conversations and the issues that they were facing in a range of different workplaces.
So, maybe I can come in there. I've only been in one community of practice session with you, and maybe just for people who are unfamiliar with the mechanism and the mode, maybe just take us through why that's different and to a normal conversation of experts sitting in a room talking about something.
Well, the essence of the community of practice, Hilton, is around working with questions. So in a normal meeting of the community, which the community may well meet over a number of years, every few weeks they get together for a couple of hours. And in a single session, we would normally work with a question that one of the professional people will bring from their practice. And we work with a single question usually for up to about 2 hours. So it is very unique because people do not often get the opportunity to explore in depth a single question in that way. Normally, questions are asked in a fairly superficial way and answered in the workplace in a fairly superficial way, without often dealing with the real fundamental underlying issues. And in this community, we have the chance really to go into the issue and why it's important for the person concerned, and then start thinking through what would be a useful way to think about that question.
So there's quite a lot of weight, I guess, placed on the focus of the question. I mean, could you do a community of practice on, why breakfast is the most important meal of the day rather than what is leadership? So, I mean, is there some work to be done on thinking about to frame a question in the most profound way?
Well, the question always starts, it comes out of the practice of the people who are involved in the community. So it's really very much related to their work and their working life. And in that sense, we choose the words community of practice quite deliberately, because we do, over a period of time, really create a strong sense of shared identity and community in the meetings. And it is very much related to the practice that people are involved with, their professional work. So it's not really about what they would like to have for breakfast. Having said that, we do go into a whole range of different kinds of questions. So it could be, for example, somebody says, I've got a really difficult meeting tomorrow morning and I don't know how to handle it, which is kind of quite an immediate, pressing, but relatively small issue. But it could be important for the individual at the time. Or, on the other hand, somebody could bring a question relating to a whole restructuring process at work, which is going to be going on for the next few months. And how are they going to position themselves and manage themselves in that huge restructuring process, which is going to have implications for their professional identity, for their life even, for their ability to stay in the organization perhaps. And we might work with that question with the individual over a number of sessions or even months as that person navigates the change process. So it could be quite a big question or just a tiny little one, really. I hope I'm not rambling too much.
No. It's fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of follow-up, but Colleen, you want to go?
Well, I think people listening to this may wonder, is this the same as team coaching, and how is it different?
That's a good question. It's not quite the same as team coaching, because it may not even be a team that we are working with, in the sense that sometimes we work with professionals from a range of different organizations who have some kind of shared identity in their practice. For instance, one could work with municipal managers, for example, from different municipalities. And they are not a team, and they don't work together on a day-by-day basis, but they come together because of their shared practice. So that's one difference, although one could also work with people who are a team in a community of practice. And then obviously there is an element of team building that comes into how we help people to work together effectively. And they know each other's context much more closely. But the essence of it is really that they could be from anywhere. They could be professionals in a particular field, or people who have a shared position in different organizations, such as the municipal managers, or people who just have some kind of shared identity, such as the young professionals. But there's always some kind of shared practice which will enable people, when they are thinking about someone's question, very often they will understand the question and why it's important, and maybe even have the question themselves.
So in the room, you have a bunch of people, everyone throwing in their ideas about answering the question. Is there an attempt to move towards an answer, or is it just the answer is the sum of everybody's ideas in the room at that time?
it tends to be the sum of everyone's ideas. So if I take you through the process, we normally meet for about 2 hours or so. And in the first hour, we simply explore the question. And it's a facilitated conversation. I'm usually there as the facilitator. And we hold people back from trying to rush to an answer. And that's in itself a learning process for the participants, because people love to immediately say what they think the person who brings the question should do. So I hold people back from that until we arrive at a point where we have a solid shared understanding of what the question is really about and why it's important for the person who brings it. And then only in the second half of the meeting do we invite people to actually give their views and opinions on what should be done. And very much don't try to create a consensus on what is the right answer. So it's very much allowing people, having understood the question, and we all have a shared understanding at that point, to give their inputs, which may sometimes be very different or even conflicting in some ways. And the individual who brings the question often makes lots of notes about what people are saying, and then they go away and they do whatever they wish to do with whatever wisdom they receive. Only at the next meeting do we invite people to share then what they did,
right?
Which is the kind of feedback loop for the group.
Okay.
So how can organizations use this approach? And I've also heard it referred to as active learning. Is that correct, or is that something else?
And sometimes people talk about action learning sets, which are similar in some ways. How organizations can use it is really to try to get to the core of deeper problems or deeper issues in the company that otherwise never get addressed. So, for example, in many companies that I go into, there is a lot of firefighting, particularly organizations that are offering services to the public in some way. If the service breaks down, everybody jumps and rushes around and tries to fix the problem. Sometimes even rushing out of my community of practice to do that. And then they come back in and the problem is solved for now. But the problem that occurred is often one that constantly reoccurs and happens again, because these service breakdowns are fixed, but not in terms of what causes them in the first place. They just put things right. So that's a kind of superficial response to an immediate crisis that happens. We're very good at fighting crises in our country. We need to actually deal with the underlying issues. So if somebody comes with a question, my concern in the community of practice is to say, what is underlying the question? Why is the question important? Because often there are other things behind that. Right. And if we start to address those, we have just a chance of dealing with the underlying issues, not the superficial presenting problem. If we deal with the underlying issues, then there's a chance of creating that double loop learning where we can stop these problems from constantly coming back to us.
Is this a mode of problem solving that you would see as something that's applicable? I mean, could a family use it to solve issues that it has? Should it be used in organizations on like a regular basis, or is this just like, 5 times a year we look at the big questions that we're facing? I mean, is it like a daily thing or something for big things?
So I think the techniques that we use can be put into the workplace on an ongoing basis. Particularly this idea of getting to a deeper understanding of what is the problem here. So a lot of the techniques and behaviors that we encourage in the community of practice are very applicable to day in the workplace, can be applied in families or other situations as well. Because we use processes of, I guess, Socratic dialogue would be one way of thinking about it, where we really try and explore what's going on in a situation. And then can think and respond intelligently to what is happening, rather than the superficial conversations that happen in the workplace, where somebody walks down the corridor and says, I've got a problem with this, and somebody says, well, you should do that.
Yes.
And then they part company and the problem isn't solved. It's maybe solved for now, but it's going to come back again tomorrow. which is hopelessly inefficient. So one of the beauties of this kind of way of working, although we invest some time and energy and sometimes cost in doing it, is that ultimately we create productivity, stimulate innovation, real problem solving, which brings huge efficiencies into the organization. So it's really about supporting the organization to perform really to its best and effectively.
So, Mark, as a facilitator, you've got quite a responsibility to create a space that's safe for everyone and to hold the people back. What are some of the things that make it a great community of practice for you? What elements need to be there?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question. I think because these ways of working can often be new to people, so it takes time for the participants or the members of the community to understand how this is going to work. It takes time for people to develop the skills to ask really good questions and to become comfortable with thinking at different levels, really being able to support people in the community in the best possible way that they can. So it takes time. Usually I feel that after about a year, a real sense of community starts to emerge, but it can take that long. Sometimes people can't attend meetings, they miss one or two, they come back, it's fresh again. So there's a continuing learning process that goes on for the participants. And sometimes if you bring the question, you can be a little bit on the spot in a sense. You can feel, oh, people are really interrogating me, and it feels a little bit uncomfortable, particularly in the early stages, until people feel that they really are being supported by this kind of process. And after the participants have had that experience, increasingly different levels of trust start to emerge, and the sense of community starts to really develop. But it can take some time.
I mean, is there some kind of facilitator accreditation, or is it just, if you know how to facilitate, you could give me the mode of doing this on a one-page piece of paper? I mean, how, what is there training? Is it obvious?
Well, one can train as a facilitator.
Right.
And there are some good facilitator training courses. And there is huge value in just years of experience in doing this kind of work. Nowadays, of course, everyone would say, oh, I'm a facilitator, I can do that. And they will facilitate a meeting or think they are, and often it's not really happening. Because people who are facilitating bring a whole range of different skills and behaviors and degrees of empathy to the process. It's very often a combination of exactly those skills and behaviors and values, in a sense, that really bring good facilitation into the room.
I mean, arguably you could take someone who's got years of experience in facilitation and train them to be a community of practice facilitator. I mean, so am I right? I mean, would there be something involved in that? Is it just sharing an idea, or is there a set of rules that you would follow?
So some people facilitate, what are called action learning sets in quite a structured, disciplined, deliberate kind of way. With the community of practice, my style tends to be a little bit more laid back, open, flexible. So I think there are different styles that people bring. But for me, the competency involved requires, I guess, three things. It requires the skill to be able to do what is being done, and it requires some experience of working with people and organizations. And I think also fundamentally, and perhaps most importantly, it requires a value set. Because if you approach it without care, without integrity, and without a strong set of values, bringing empathy into the process, you can't train those things easily. You can't train people to have values. Either people have values and apply certain values to these kind of processes, or they don't. But it's hard to train them. But I think they are critically important if people are going to be able to facilitate well in almost any situation.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, the idea of competency is based on the skills, it's based on experience and a set of values. Right. Even if one is just learning to drive, for example. Driving is a skill that you can be taught. And you need, if you're going to be a good driver, you need to have some experience in what you're doing. And also you need a good set of values of care for other road users, care for your passengers, making sure they have their seatbelts on and that kind of thing. That's the value set that goes with being a competent and experienced and skilled driver.
I mean, it's really hard to articulate how tricky this job is, being the facilitator. I think a lot of people would say, oh, I can do that, whatever, I'm a coach, I'm a psychologist, I can definitely do that. But having sat in a few that you facilitated, I think they can go horribly wrong if you don't know what's going on. And that leads into my question is, a lot of these deeper issues unravel as psychological issues. A lot of the stuff that ends up coming out or to the surface is low confidence, lack of trust in self. And then how do you kind of manage that in a way that people aren't too exposed or it doesn't end up feeling like therapy?
Yes, I think as the community develops, these questions are important for the community. And they have to be owned, in a sense, by the community of people who are present as well as by the facilitator. So, and I think that does increasingly start to happen. So it's about noticing, it's about caring. I don't see them as therapeutic sessions, although people's personal issues often emerge in the process. But my fundamental assumption is that people are there and fundamentally healed and okay, and that if people need a kind of therapeutic process of some kind with professional therapy, then that is referred somewhere else, as it is when one is coaching someone. If other issues emerge that the coach is not qualified to deal with, then the important thing is to refer it.
I'd be interested in hearing some of the intriguing questions that have been asked that you've had to deal with. Is that fair?
Yes, it's a fair question. I think, yes, one of the questions that came up was, well, there are many. The one that I mentioned earlier around the individual who's going into a huge restructuring process in his business, in which work that he had been involved with for quite a number of years was essentially being taken away from him. And he was feeling very aggrieved and upset and concerned about what was happening. And this came as a question to the community of practice, and then how we could support him in thinking, reframing possibly what was happening, and developing a response that was appropriate, not angry or aggressive, but that would work in the long run. And for that individual, it was a huge process of learning about himself, having a support network where he could explore different options and alternatives. And he came away from it really with a really strong sense of, I'm now in a community, and this community really cares for me. And he now talks about it as a community, which was a huge growth for everyone, I think, in the process. Yeah, so that was interesting because it wasn't simply a single question for one meeting, but it went on over a number of sessions that we had.
And I guess in a way it taps into broader constructs of how we deal with adversity at work, how we have conversations with that we may not agree with what's going on. All those kind of things are in the subtext.
Yes. And in the course of the community, we also develop a really strong shared learning platform in which we learn about asking questions, how to ask good, deep, relevant questions in particular situations. We build our listening skills, creating deep listening, and learn to think at a number of different levels about what's going on. So the learning that comes is very useful for people in terms of structuring how they engage at work and in their practice in a whole different set of important ways that are often neglected. we recruit people because of their wonderful skills and competencies, but we often don't find out if people are good at asking questions or good at listening. Very basic things that are so important at work. Those things are kind of somehow taken for granted, or perhaps actually just neglected as being fundamental building blocks of how people communicate effectively at work.
Okay.
So I think it would be useful, Mark, to chat a little bit around how do you create a good question, because I know you're always redirecting us in that community of practice. Now be careful, don't ask it. And maybe just what are the pointers of what does a good question look like?
Well, there are, if you look at the internet about asking good questions, you can find thousands of guides to how to do that. But for me, I think a lot of our questions tend to be very superficial, or what I would call environmental. Somebody says, I've got this issue about something, and people will ask them, well, who will be there? What's going to be happening? What are the issues? Without exploring perhaps how somebody feels about a particular situation. So we tend to skirt around an issue that presents. And I think a very powerful question to ask somebody who's got a concern about something is to say, well, how do you feel about it? Why is it important for you to bring this question today? What's going on for you that this is so important? And then someone starts to open up about what's really happening for them. And if the conversation can go there, very often then how people respond and the wisdom that they share with the individual will be very useful, because you're dealing with how they really feel about what's going on. And that's really often the underlying real issue for an individual.
I think the other thing that happens a lot is that we focus on people that aren't in the room. So in some of the questions that I've heard, and you often redirect and say, well, they're not in the room, so they can't comment.
Yes.
And I guess that's a coaching hack as well, is to really try and coach the person that's in the room.
Yes. It's sometimes easier to talk about people who aren't there and to solve the problems of people who aren't there.
And they're the problem.
But I mean, it also feels like something that could be used in deciding about organizational strategy. I mean, like it could be used to focus the direction of a business in some way.
Yes. One may go beyond a simple community of practice, but a lot of the thinking, for example, thinking about what I call the logical levels in a situation, going beyond simply a quick response to a problem and saying what is really important in this situation, or what does this situation mean for who we are as a business? Are we challenged at that kind of level? So helping people to think at different levels about what's really important before rushing to the answer can often open up different responses or different answers, and maybe answers that are more useful rather than the superficial knee-jerk response we often give.
Yeah, it's less targeted at kind of closed questions with concrete answers and more at open, experiential, highly interpretive situations.
Yes. I think if I think about thinking at those different levels as a country, an example that I often give is when, as a country, we were faced with the HIV pandemic over the last 20, 30 years. Once we realized there was a problem, we leapt into quick solutions. So we're going to tell everybody to use condoms, or we're going to tell everybody only to have one partner. So it was a problem and then an idea about solving it. And those superficial knee-jerk responses didn't work. And it was only when, as a country, we started thinking through issues of identity of young people and what was important for them in their lives, and then what would they need, could we start developing responses to the pandemic that started to have an impact. So we have to go beyond just the knee-jerk response and think things through in a deeper kind of way to unlock the real opportunities in a situation, which will be useful and effective.
I think it would be useful if you could just touch on those levels.
Well, I ask people sometimes, first of all, just to think about why are we here in a situation? What are we trying to achieve? What is our purpose? I call that the kind of spiritual level. And if we lose touch with that, then we're not going to come with anything useful. Then below that, there's the identity level. Who are we? Who are we as a country? Who are we as a people? Who are we in this organization? Reconnect with that level if we don't have a sense of it. And then if we have a sense of our identity, we go to the level of what's important. What are our values and beliefs here? Doing that, then we can say, okay, if this is who we are and this is what's important, what do we need to be effective and to be integral with our identity and purpose? What do we need? And if we can answer, or what do we already have sometimes? It's a kind of level of resources and networks and facilities and so on. Once we know the answers to all those questions, then what we're going to do will become obvious. The action plan writes itself, in a sense. And it will be very different from what we would write if we simply rushed to the solution without thinking through those other levels.
I mean, in some way, there seems to be like a deep phenomenology in the process. So you kind of, by asking the questions and getting into maybe the empathic part, you kind of connect with the humanness of the question and try to get beyond, I don't know, the titles of the people, the status of the people, the concrete things, but much more what's going on a deeper human level, and then approaching it once you're there. I mean, is that simplifying it too much?
I don't think it's simplifying it. I think, there are a number of different ways of thinking about people and organizations that come into this way of working, and value systems also. I mean, I try to bring a kind of deep humanist value to the whole process. And then there's thinking around psychology and dialogue, that Socratic dialogue idea of asking why and repeating the question why until we really know what's going on. So some of these, we bring together a range of different ways of thinking about people and organization into the process. And the interesting thing now is, these days, is that the whole idea of organization itself is starting to change. That organizations increasingly nowadays have to be places where people learn rather than where people do stuff. Right. The doing stuff is, and what the organization produces or provides by way of services, is almost secondary. We come to work to do those things, but really fundamentally we come to work to learn about stuff and about each other. And that's the exciting redefinition, I guess, of workplaces that is underway in the world with this fourth industrial revolution. Anybody can do stuff, but learning is about increasingly a social process where people have to connect and engage with each other and find new ways of doing these things that have sometimes been lost in the last 100 years of corporate, what I call the corporate death zone.
Wow.
Where people come to work and feel that nothing they think or do is really useful or important and nobody cares.
Does this work for everyone? Because I'm just picturing an organization in mind that we've been working with where the executive just don't trust each other at all.
Oh,
is that
sounds very sad.
And they need to rebuild trust. But there's also, you need quite a lot of patience to go into this process. It's not a quick fix, I don't think.
I think trust can be built in 2 minutes if you want to.
How? Do tell.
I think so. Sometimes people think that trust is something that has to emerge over a long, long period of time. People have to earn trust, and we're going to wait and see if they earn our trust. And it can take forever, because if you take that perspective, you withhold trust because you're waiting to see if people deserve it. And then those people don't feel trusted, so they also then withhold trust, and nothing ever happens. It never comes. At some point, and I like to do it right at the beginning of a new team starting up, somebody has to say, I'm going to trust you people from now, from this moment onwards, I trust you. And I'm going to show how I trust you by asking you to do some stuff, and I'm going to go away and leave you to do it. And the people immediately feel that they are trusted. So trust is something that you can ask for or give or invest in a particular situation or group of people or in a manager. Just making the decision to trust. Because if I then say, I'm going to trust you to do this, then you know that you have it happens both ways. So if I'm going to trust you, I'm going to ask you to trust me. If you ask somebody to trust you, you have a responsibility then to that person, not to break that. And if you invite the team to be trusted, they also have a responsibility then to deliver on that. Mm. If the trust is broken, then a real conversation has to happen about what that means and how we're going to move forward from here in a way that is a bit different, where we can re-establish the trust again. Mm. But it must happen in the first few minutes of the first meeting.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because a lot of
So put it on the table. I think that's
yes,
what I'm saying. Put on the table the question of trust right now, right here. Right. I'm going to start by trusting you.
Right.
And see how it goes.
I mean, it sounds...
It's not a choice, actually.
Right.
It's not a choice. It has to happen right now, because the alternative is that there won't be any trust. Mm. And everybody's waiting for it to somehow miraculously emerge over a long period of time to see if people earn it or not. Mm. It won't happen. Mm. So you don't have it. If you want to have trust in your organization, you have to put it on the table and talk about it, and then make it happen.
Mm. So with this particular group, there's a lot of unfinished business, and I suppose the faulty thinking around that is when we've healed all this unfinished business and it hasn't been fair, then I will trust you. And you're saying that that's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen. We have to talk about it now. So from now on, we're going to start trusting each other. So what do we have to do to make that work? What are the issues? If there's a history, what are the issues that we have to quickly resolve so that we can move forward? And we'll do that on a trusting basis. And sometimes a facilitator will help that process and ensure that that process works well, and invite the people to work in a way that is trusting from now on. So a facilitator can sometimes be very useful in that kind of situation. But if you postpone it, it's never been there, you're saying, in the first place, and then you postpone it until something else happens, it's never going to come.
Okay.
That's my thought anyway. I may be wrong.
I mean, you raised earlier, Colleen, the idea of something going wrong in a community of practice session or in that. I mean,
yes.
What contributes to things going wrong? And what does wrong look like?
One of the things that can sometimes happen is that tensions arise between people in the group for some reason, or people misunderstand each other, or it's all the wrong things that can happen in any organizational context. Or people just don't like each other for some reason. The community ultimately has a responsibility to work with that and sort it out. The facilitator obviously can encourage people to stay with a process of empathy, can encourage the building of trust in the community, can encourage people to respect confidentiality and so on. Ultimately, it's for the group.
So as the facilitator, you would invite the group to be part of the process of something adversarial going on between two participants.
Yes, it doesn't. I don't find it often happens, but it can happen, and it can be. My particular style is to encourage the community to deal with it if there's an issue. I also like to share sometimes the facilitation, so to encourage people who are part of the community of practice to sometimes have a go at facilitating one day, so that I can bring my questions as a member of the community. Because when I'm facilitating it, I really stay out of the conversation myself, rather. So I don't work as a participant, but rather guide the process and focus on that. I like the community itself to increasingly take ownership of what's happening.
Right. Mark, I know that you've been involved with community of practice, with leadership in organizations. I'm interested in kind of your synthesis of the best view of contemporary effective leadership? I mean, is there any kind of thinking that you have around that?
Yes. I think that nowadays our country, our state-owned enterprises, our businesses are too complex for one person to have any or all of the answers, certainly to have all of the answers. We deal with complex systems, and so the idea of having one person who's going to solve everything doesn't work in any business or any state-owned enterprises or any government. So leadership has to be increasingly dispersed to different levels. In fact, everybody has a leadership responsibility now in our country and around the world, because otherwise it's not going to work. So we cannot all be Nelson Mandela or Albertina Sisulu or whoever it is. So we have to increasingly find our own leadership style. So the synthesis, I think, that emerges increasingly that people talk about is the idea of authentic leadership, in which people take their own leadership responsibility in an ethical way, which draws on their own life journey and their own experiences, which are those are the things that form us as leaders, I guess, or the challenges and experiences that we face along the way. And that becomes the feeding ground for ourselves as leaders, is to be able to draw on our leadership experiences and our life experiences. These are the things that help us to become leaders, even though we may not be in a formal leadership position, but we can engage with other people on the basis of who we are, authentically and true to ourselves. So we have to drop the act, in a sense, and drop the pretense that when we come to work we become somebody else, and be true to who we are, and simply work and engage with other people on the basis of being true to ourselves. Because if you're true to yourself, then you'll be true to the people around you as well.
But I mean, that sounds fine if you're true to yourself is a benevolent, open, relationship-centric person. But what if true to yourself is, I'm a narcissist who believes I'm better than anyone else, and if people listen to me, things will just go absolutely perfectly.
Yes,
and that's my authentic position.
And that works for many people. And many people rise to the top of organizations with that perspective. And they can be very successful, often for a long period of time. The danger is that one day you are going to be in a dark alley. And someone is going to come and put a knife into your back. I mean, I'm putting it very sharply. But you make enemies along the way. But it's a choice. People can decide what kind of leader they wish to be. And some people choose one path, some people choose another. And we live with the choices that we make. So you can be very successful and the kind of leader that you're talking about. You can rise to the top of organizations, you can make lots of money, but you are probably treading on people as you go.
But it sounds like from a leadership development perspective, that is so open-ended as to be almost valueless, because you wouldn't, in a leadership development program, say, be whoever you are, one day you'll find out the consequences and,
Well, what I would say is that everybody has a choice to be the leader that you choose to be. For me, leadership is not a neutral concept, though. So I don't think one can hold up anybody as an example of being a leader. Adolf Hitler, some people say, was a leader, but that's a choice that you can make if you want to be that kind of leader. So for me, the fundamental choice is, do you want to be somebody who is effective and integral and works with people on the basis of a set of values that work for them and for yourself? Or do you simply want to be the narcissist who is only concerned about yourself and your own progress? It's a choice you can make. But I don't believe myself that leadership is neutral. I think there is a set of values that one has to bring to how we choose to work. And your values may be slightly different from mine, but for me there's an underlying human set of values that are important, which is around connection, empathy, working with integrity with people.
But that does sound like a model that you're working towards. It's not as open as be whoever you are. It's like good leaders have some sense of empathy and humanness and values.
But I'm not going to impose that model on you. I'm just saying that this is one of the choices that we have to make in the world. And for me, Donald Trump or someone like that does not embrace those kind of perspectives. But I'm not going to tell Cyril Ramaphosa what his value system should be. Though I think that in running the country, having a good set of values is going to help him and be useful for him. And he'll have to choose what are the ones for him. From his life experience and from his learnings over his career and his history, he will find the value set that works best for him.
Let's hope it happens soon. Mark, what can coaches take away from the style of solving problems in their coaching business?
Okay, well, most of the people that we are coaching as business or executive coaches are people who are working in organizations. And I think it's really important to be effective in coaching that one has a good understanding of organizational dynamics and what happens in organizations, public sector, private sector, whatever it is. So I think that having a wider perspective, sometimes even having a world view, is really important to be able to coach people who maybe one could be coaching people from around the world. So we have to know what's going on in the world and in organizations and in the world of work nowadays to be very effective in coaching people, because otherwise we're going to miss context and understanding of where people are coming from. I think a worldview is going to be very useful for new coaches, as well as obviously the coaching skills and behaviors, and to be accredited and trained as a coach is very important. But having a wider view goes with it.
And is there any research that has been done around community of practice and the benefits that you know of?
I'm sure there are. I'm actually supervising somebody who is doing a master's thesis on the value of a community of practice. So more and more research is being done. It comes out of work by Etienne Wenger and other people to look at the value of community in learning. And it comes out of the idea of the research that has been done that shows the most effective learning is done in a social context. So the value of the social context for learning. And more people are actually researching how it works. With young people's forums in businesses, it doesn't always have to be called a community of practice. That's just my terminology. But people talk about action learning sets, professional development forums, where the young people coming into a company meet on a regular basis. So there are different ways of framing and different frameworks for how these things work. But I think increasingly there is recognition in the research around the value of learning as a social process rather than simply a process of teaching people.
Right. And that's interesting in terms of the move to online learning and more, less of the social interaction, because that seems to be where a lot of training is going.
And importantly so, and there is huge value in reinforcing the delivery of content over online channels with enabling people to connect, even if we're connecting with people in other places, but having some kind of learning forum or syndicate group that is online to help people make meaning of the content and to understand how it can apply in different situations is very important.
I mean, it sounds to me like it taps into the zeitgeist of kind of open sourced and Wikipedia, where you don't learn from an expert, but you learn from other people in the world having that experience. So people just pool their knowledge, and that's where you get the richest information.
So this talks to what people increasingly call the collaborative commons idea, where people are sharing. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the world now are sharing ways to solve problems, ways to fix things. If you want to fix anything, you can find now a YouTube clip which will show you how to do it.
Right.
I have this funny little power cord that goes into my Apple Mac, my MacBook, and it tends to break after a lot of being yanked out of the connecting port. It tends to break, and you can go and buy another cord from the Apple store for 1,600 Rand if you choose to do so. But there is somebody on YouTube who'll show you how to fix it, or at least keep it going for another year and a half before it finally gives up.
Right.
So people are sharing ideas without any care for reward or anything like that, just because it's cool to do it.
Right. Yeah.
You can fix anything online now.
So maybe it's a good place there to put a punctuation mark, but maybe just to say, if an organization wanted to start such a community of practice, what would they do next?
Well, they can get in touch with me. My name is Mark Turpin, and I can be found, I think, if you Google me, you'll find ways of contacting me. It's very good to have a good facilitator who will take you through the process, at least of starting the community of practice. After a while, there may be somebody in the business who can take over the facilitation, so I don't have to be there for forever. But it's really good to have someone who can bring a mixture of understanding of facilitation, coaching skills to get it going and to establish it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It was really wonderful to explore this topic a bit deeper. And anything from you to end off?
I think it's been extremely enriching. It makes me kind of excited to go and use this on a whole bunch of questions that I have. So, thanks, Mark. I think that was powerful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My personal experience of working with Mark in a community of practice devoted to executive coaching has fundamentally shifted the way I ask questions and how I pace problem solving. If you're looking for a way to interact with fellow practitioners, why not investigate starting a community of practice or find a group nearby? Mark has linked some very helpful resources, so check them out. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and comment, and check out our website www.omnicore.co.za for our blog and previous episodes. A special shout out to Neville Golden for sharing our episode on mindful eating globally. We really appreciate that, and as always, a big thank you to our producer William Irwin.